Welcome to Troutwood Live. I am Gene Natali with Troutwood. Every company and every person has a story. Each week we host a guest from a company in the S&P 500. We talk about that company, our guest's career, and their personal story. We began Troutwood Live 5 months ago to help schools teaching remotely or via hybrid learning make it through the COVID months. This is our last episode for this school year, and it's only fitting that today we're having a conversation with our first retiree. Specifically, we're going to be talking about students viewing their career as a journey. Our guest, Bruce Gray, recently retired from Bank of America, where he was a senior vice president. Bruce, welcome to Troutwood Live.
Thank you, Gene.
Bruce, I'm going to give a quick parallel for how you and I know each other. I am currently an executive in residence up at Penn State Barron, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are a graduate of the school.
I am a graduate of the school, and I've been pretty active with the school for the past several years, working with students. So I sit on the advisory board for the business school, as well as work with the club. I really enjoyed working with students. I learn a lot from students every time I interact with them. They get me out of my comfort zone, which is something that's really important that we do. We can't always stay in our comfort zones. So I get as much out of working with students as they get from working with me.
Well, and I've heard similarly from students and also from Dr. Greg Philbeck, who's the director of the business school up there, who made the introduction. So thank you for the work you're doing, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Bruce, before we dive into our topic in our conversation, give us the quick background, the non-finance, the non-work side of Bruce.
Yeah, I'm a pretty quiet, laid-back guy. I enjoy walking and exercising, especially when COVID isn't around. My wife and I recently relocated out to the Phoenix, Arizona area, and we're just really enjoying the nice weather. Unfortunately, it's a little cool here today, so my windows are closed, but believe it or not, I am a citrus farmer. I actually have 3 citrus trees beside my house, and we've been enjoying the great smell of orange blossoms because one of the orange trees is in bloom. My wife and I like volunteering for pet rescue. We worked with a rescue for several years that's virtual. And it's kind of neat to have watched the world transition from mainly physical to virtual, and have been part of a virtual organization for such a long period of time, and watch them not miss a beat as the pandemic really changed how everyone did everything. That's a little bit about myself.
Bruce, you said something that is sticking in my ears, citrus farmer. I'm just curious, when you say 3 trees, what does that mean? Is that barrelfuls of oranges?
Well, it can be. I fight the birds for the oranges because they're sweet, and then I have a lemon tree, actually a variety that comes out of Italy that has these giant lemons on them, and I do have bushels full of those. They're really used to make limoncello. So my job for next year is to figure out how to make limoncello.
Bruce, a question I always like to ask folks who are recently retired is, are you good at it?
I like to say I'm pretty good at it. You know, there's certain, it's funny, I have a cousin who is also professional, and he and I were Zoom chatting a little while ago, and we were talking about the things we really enjoyed from our professions and about learning. And you know, even though I'm retired, I'm still learning, and I still have access to really good material, keeping up to date on economics and finance, and the things that I really loved. I loved as a student, I loved as a professional, and I continue to love as a retiree. So I would hope I'm good at it. You know, as things pick up from the pandemic here, one of the things I really want to start to work with is with the Service Corps of retired executives, and try to work with small businesses as they try to recover from the pandemic.
That's a concept I hear so often, and I want to just repeat that statement for our student audience, that we never stop learning. Bruce, I'm going to jump just before we get into talking about your career, your experiences. I'm going to just jump to the Troutwood Map, where we are going to give our student and our listeners, our viewers, just a visual of what Bank of America is, the entity. And the fun fact that our team put together for Bank of America started as Bank of Italy. Its ability to provide loans in the aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 is a major part of the company's origin story, its beginning. And for students that are interested in learning more about the company, what the company does, and I would definitely point out that this conversation is Gene and Bruce's opinions of Bank of America. So form your own opinions by visiting the company's fact sheets, exploring careers, etc., news, headlines. I will read the company's community engagement before we slide over. I think it's one of my favorite parts of the work we do here at Troutwood. But Bank of America employees and retirees volunteer thousands of hours globally in our neighborhoods each year. In fact, more than 3,000 charitable organizations benefit from our employees and Bruce retirees' dedication each year. So the reason I wanted to read that statement was because of how you started. You immediately talked about organizations that you want to get involved in now that you're retired. So very interesting synergies.
Yeah. So, Gene, can I just talk for a couple of seconds about community service? Because it's kind of a fun story. One of the things that you learn as you go through your career is the type of team you're working on, right? Some teams function very, very well. Some teams don't function as well. And, we rebuilt a highly functioning team that I worked with at Bank of America. And it was fun when we went out to volunteer, how our team functioned transferred immediately to our volunteer work. And we ended up being so productive at some of the volunteer jobs we did that the organization would call us back and ask us to please come on back and work with them. And I thought that was just something interesting about how a good corporate culture can translate into a good community culture. And that was something I was always very proud of about how that translated.
That's a powerful quote. A good corporate culture translates into a good community culture. Well, Bruce, tell us, for anyone who might not be familiar with Bank of America, can you tell our audience a little bit about Bank of America and what the company does?
Yeah, Bank of America is a very full-service financial services company, and they have three main client groups. The first client group is individuals, and the biggest way you see the individuals and how we bank with them are through the branches that are out there. How Bank of America, please, I'm no longer part of Bank of America, speaking for myself, but any bank, the way you see how they bank with individuals is through the branches that they have. The second group that we worked with are businesses, and businesses ranged anywhere from single proprietorships to Bank of America works with the largest companies in the U.S. and helps them access capital markets, equity markets. They make loans to them, so they really work that way. And then the third we work with are institutions. So they're working with other institutions to help serve, our financial system. The one thing I would like to say about Bank of America, and my experience there, is they really put the client at the center of all they do. They are very disciplined with regard to doing the right thing and serving the client the right way. There was no self-dealing or looking out for yourself. The real piece there was to look out for the client and balance the needs of the client and the bank. That's really what we were asked to do.
Bruce, I think there's a big classroom lesson with what you just said, because it's oftentimes, I teach at the University of Pittsburgh, we can look at a company that is big like Bank of America and say, boy, look at them, that was easy, when it was anything but. You three times have said the importance of putting the customer first. And there's a strong analogy between putting the customer first and I think business is growing.
Yeah, I think it certainly helped my success when I was there at Bank of America and putting the customer first and just figuring out what was the best way to get something done for a customer. A lot of times that was the conversation rather than people in turf war fighting over, it's my customer. No one person owned a customer. The customer was a customer of Bank of America. And we had to figure out what the best way was to serve that customer.
Bruce, what was your specific role at Bank of America, and can you describe it?
Yeah, I had many roles at Bank of America. My last one was in the commercial real estate area. And basically in my role, I oversaw the underwriting. So in other words, we would look at a financing opportunity and try to understand what the risks that were, what was the probability we get paid back, and make sure we were making a sound loan. So I oversaw that process. There were underwriters that worked with me with regard to that. Then I structured loans, worked with clients. I was client facing. So I was working directly with the client, structuring the loan to meet their needs, really understanding what they needed from the financing. And then I would negotiate the loan agreement. I would close the loan, and I really took the loan through the approval process. A lot of times, when we'd be working on new things, I was educating more senior members of our staff, just how the financing was working, what we were doing, and really educating everyone on our staff as to why we were doing it and how it benefited the client.
Bruce, I'm going to put my educator hat on as I throw a question at you. For a student who maybe is unsure of how debt works, when you talk about that process of approval, of understanding a customer's needs, can I maybe put it in the simplest context of a choice that students understand and say maybe a car or a home purchase, which are common for all of us? I don't just walk up and say, Bruce, here's my wallet or my phone app. How do I get the approval for that purchase?
Right. Well, one of the things, actually, you have to realize debt is something that has to be paid back. Bankers don't lend money and not expect it to get it back. And so when I was lending money, we were expected to get the money back, 99.6% of the time, the whole way through a cycle. So, there's very little room for error. But essentially what we look at is there's two things that I think you were looking at. You're looking at someone's ability to pay you back. What are your earnings? Are your earnings, large enough and stable enough in order to support the debt? And then I think the second piece is what's your willingness? And a lot of times that's the track record you have in how you have handled debt in the past. So I say the two things that bankers are really looking at are your ability and your willingness to repay debt.
Bruce, one of the,
so again,
it's a top two question. Yeah, top two question that both high school and college students approach me and ask. Bruce, what can I do today to improve my credit score? So before I sit down with Bruce Gray and figure out what my interest rate would be on a loan, what can I do today to give me the highest odds of a lower interest rate?
Well, I got to preface this. I was a commercial lender. I wasn't a consumer lender. So I really didn't do a lot with that. So I'm just going to speak of it from a personal standpoint. My wife and I have always been very, very careful about how we've handled our debt. We've taken out debt to do things. We've always made sure we could repay it. Many times we repaid it early. There were times we took advantage of things like zero interest. A lot of times when you get a zero interest opportunity, that's someone extending credit to you, and your ability to really live up to that contract for zero interest, that helps build your debt rating and your credit score. So my two things are, handle debt responsibly. Don't get in over your head. It's easy to get in over your head, right? There's plenty of offers that come out every day with people encouraging us to take a credit card, to spend on a credit card. We really need to think about what we spend, have a budget, make sure we live within our means. And I think as long as you do those things and use debt correctly, you'll build a good credit score for yourself. Sorry, I don't have the technical answer to that, Gene, but that's the practical one.
That's the experience-based answer, Bruce. Well, let's bridge that to the commercial experience. So to students who are going to be working for a corporation or business someday, or students who maybe are going to be starting their own business, and maybe it's a dog walking business with 3 employees, maybe it's a progression up a bank like Bank of America. How does debt work on the commercial side?
On the commercial side, actually, debt works a few different ways. A lot of times people will use debt in order to bridge timing differences with regard to when they have to spend money on products they're going to sell and when they're going to collect that money for the products they sold. So that's really classic short-term financing. And all you're trying to do is bridge that gap. And that's one of the main places where banks really step in for small and medium-sized businesses. It's really helping them bridge those gaps. The other way banks, I think, really work with people is, let's say you have a longer-term need. So I worked with plenty of companies who had a need to either retool or buy new machinery, or they wanted to incorporate further efficiencies. And with that, we'd really have to sit down with them and understand what the payback was, right? Was it a smart investment? Were we really going to become that much more efficient? Because essentially what you're looking at is you're looking at investing money that's going to provide you with more money than you would have gotten had you not made the investment. So that's the 2 main ways that we really worked with clients. And it was really trying to help them, if you really think about it, bridging that gap was important to them. That was something that was key to their survival and to their staying in business. And we helped them with that in the same way that you would be helping a client who is very important for them to be able to control their costs, be able to have the latest equipment, and be able to compete in the best way that they could.
Bruce, I'm going to try to bridge this, the wisdom in your words, to our younger student listeners. And one of our frequent guests is a young man named Graydon. And Graydon is, let's say hypothetically that Graydon wants to start a dog walking business, to my analogy, and he starts his business, he puts his flyers up, and his phone is ringing off the hook. The whole neighborhood wants Graydon to come walk their dogs, but Graydon is just one person. So he could approach an organization at this commercial level and say, if I hire 3 more dog walkers, I can fill all this need. I just don't have the money today to hire all 3. And that's where someone like you or Bank of America would say, absolutely, you've got a business, you're showing us the sustainability. We can help you meet your upfront, you used the word capital, your upfront capital needs, which will help you meet your long-term goals. Did I miss in that analogy there? Would you tweak that at all?
The only thing I would tweak a little bit is banks look for the owners to have money invested in the business. Okay. And so, that's one of the things is, you can't go on out and expect the bank to front all your capital needs. You're going to have to really have thought through the capital that you're going to have to invest to begin with and have that invested. And that's really where Gene, I think you're talking about, you've demonstrated an ability to run a business, right? It's you put your own capital to work, you've proven that it's working, and you're right, things are going good. Phone's ringing off the hook. I need more money in order to make my business grow. And that's certainly a place where a bank can step up and help you.
I like that. So that in our analogy, Graydon would show the investment. He would buy the flyers. He would put them around the neighborhood. He would buy the equipment he needed to run the business and say, Bruce, Bank of America, I'm invested now. I have made this investment in my business and I'm getting interest that says if I invest more, good things can happen.
Yep.
Bruce, let's talk about you're our first guest coming from the world of retirement. It didn't happen overnight. What was your career progression?
Yeah, my career progression was pretty interesting. I actually graduated school as an accountant, and I started as an auditor, and started at actually the old Chase Manhattan Bank as an auditor, and it ended up being a great place. I mean, I knew I didn't want to be, had a pretty good idea I didn't want to be an auditor for the rest of my life, and it really gave me a chance to look at all different facets of the bank as I went through the audit. And one of the places that really caught me and that I was really intrigued with was commercial lending. And 3 years into my audit career, the bank opened up, every once in a while they'd open up positions to people who had been with the bank for 3 to 5 years to join the commercial lending training program. And at that time it was 16 months. It was probably even more intensive than getting an MBA. And really, I really worked my tail end off in that program. Really learned a lot of good skills that took me the whole way through my career. After that, actually, I got a really interesting job. I was in a credit policy position, and actually, Chase Manhattan was a global bank, so they had actually more than half their profits came from overseas. So in my credit policy job, I spent about 70% of my time overseas, and
Wow.
I was going into, essentially what we would go into is we go into situations where the economy was in flux, and the bank really needed to understand were our credit policies right, what was going on with the underlying loan portfolio there, and what adjustments needed to be made. So a couple examples were, there was an oil crash in the mid 80s where, oil had been sky high per barrel. The price of it fell quite a bit. Indonesia was a leading exporter of oil, and its economy really fell on hard times. So they took a group of us and went into Indonesia to look at what was really happening with the economy, what was going on there. Another interesting job that I worked on was actually they asked us to look at 2 different banking systems. They asked us to look at the Japanese and Swiss banking systems. Some of them were very secretive banking systems. Their banks didn't disclose a lot. The bank had growing relations with both Japanese and Swiss banks, and they were trying to just really test the risk. And they asked us to really talk about what we thought about banking system. What were the banks like? We even looked at non-bank banks, shadow banking, which you hear some about, which were unregulated banks. They do some of the things that banks do, not all of them. That's why they stay unregulated. But we got a chance to look at some of that. So it was it really served as a great basis for me. I got probably a decade of experience in 2 years.
And some traveling. One of the themes that the young people can be very interested in seeing parts of the world, and there are a lot of careers that make that possible. Bruce, I want to
go ahead. I'm sorry, Gene. Go ahead.
So I want to. You mentioned graduating in the time frame when you and I were talking beforehand. You had mentioned you graduated in 1980.
Yep.
And last year, the class of 2020 graduated into COVID. The class of 2021 will again be graduating into COVID. 1980 wasn't an easy year to graduate into either, was it?
No, it wasn't. We were in a double dip recession. Believe it or not, actually back around 1980, interest rates were up in around 20%. So think about where interest rates are right now. They're basically zero. And at that point in time, you had interest rates that were in the high teens. So, there was a lot of dislocation within the economy. People were really struggling to figure out, how to make investments, how to make them work. And as a result, there was a dip recession, and I ended up being underemployed. And I didn't let that impact me. I stayed on course and just kept pursuing the right opportunity, and it did come up for me.
It's a great lesson in terms of, for the class of 2021, this is their first experience with a recession, but they happen more often than we might think.
They do. And, the one thing I would say, don't be afraid about being underemployed for a little bit, right? If you're good, you have a good work ethic, you're smart, the opportunities will open up for you. Recessions don't last forever, right? Good work ethic and good knowledge, that does last forever.
That's another powerful quote. Bruce, what advice? So as you and I were talking before, and one of the quotes I wrote down saying you can't give up. So you experienced a double dip. You graduate from a terrific university, and you graduate into a double dip recession. You persevere through it, and we could look at your path now and say, boy, it was easy. Bruce is a great success, did everything right. I have to imagine you were feeling some emotion in 1980 and 1981 after graduating into a double dip recession.
I was, and to be honest with you, it felt good. I remember the first time I thought about ever working in New York City, and I watched a show on PBS called Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser. And as a junior, I thought I was a pretty sharp guy with regard to finance and accounting. And I remember watching the intro of the show, and they showed Wall Street, and I sat in my dorm room in Erie, Pennsylvania, and dreamed of working in New York City. And then I watched the first show, and let me tell you, I was making notes furiously of things I needed to research because there was so much I didn't understand. And I didn't let that really influence me. I kept on watching Wall Street Week. I kept on researching. I kept on networking with young professionals to get their insight, to learn what they were learning so that I could start to really keep up with what was going on Wall Street Week. And actually, I had never flown before I got the interview in New York City. First time I was on a plane, I was flying to New York City for a job interview that I eventually landed. So, no matter where you're at, no matter what your background is, you do have to persevere. And I do hope that everyone will keep that in mind, that your dreams can come true. You just have to stick with it, and you really have to persevere, right? There comes a time when you're in charge of yourself, right? And I think as you go through college and you get into the work world, you realize you're really in charge of your own future. And it's up to you to have the discipline to do the right things to ensure the fact that you have a successful future. And I think one of the things that ensures your success, and I was lucky, I love accounting, I love finance, I still love learning about it. And you need to find something that you're passionate about, because your passion is always going to show through. And passion a lot of times wins the day. When employers are looking for someone, they're looking for someone who has a contagious personality, that is passionate about what they do. And that's one thing. If you find something you love and you're passionate about it, stick with it, because you'll be good at it.
Bruce, there's so much courage in your words. I mean, hopping on your first flight for a job interview. I remember, I swam in college and being with friends who are hopping on planes for the first time, white knuckled, holding seatbelt. There's courage in doing new things at any point of our life. Bruce, Bruce, this is so much fun to learn from you. I want to share one quote from our YouTube chat here that I think it just shows the way that inspiration is contagious. Our friend Graydon says, the business I want to start is a company that helps people. I am one of those people who think we have a talented generation. Every generation behind us is more talented than the generation that comes before us. And folks like you and I, we have a responsibility to ensure that trend continues, that they're always smarter than we were, Bruce.
That's right. That's what I enjoyed with working with. That's the reason why I enjoy working with students. That's what I say. I learned from them because they are smarter than I was when I was at that point in my career.
Well, as before the last question, I want to speak directly to Graydon and say, Graydon, you can do it. go do it. And Bruce, my last question to you, to that audience of students, both the students that you continue to work with at the collegiate level, all the way down, what advice would you give them with what you know now?
I think the biggest piece of advice is your career is a journey. It's not a destination. It's going to take a lot of twists and a lot of turns. Some of them you plan hard for and you work for. Other ones just present themselves. And there's a lot of times that you have to make, tough decisions about which way you're going to take your career, what you're going to do. And, having people that provide you with good, sound advice, people you can talk with, that understand you, and where you can make it clear what's important to you. They help you make some of those decisions. The decision is ultimately yours, but I think having people around who are good friends you talk to and understand you can help provide you with some feedback that helps clarify things for yourself.
Bruce, I think that is, I'm going to live by those words also. As we wind down, I'm going to jump for students to your career is a journey, not a destination, to teachers in the classroom. Check out the Bank of America fact sheet. When I select the Explore Career buttons in the Bank of America fact sheet, it's a terrific website because I can actually search by geography. So I'm going to just find an opportunity here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I live. And I find this neat. I can at least, take the exploratory steps from what we learned talking with you, Bruce, in terms of understanding careers that are possible and where they might be possible. Bruce, on behalf of everyone watching, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us today. This was a pleasure and a privilege.
No, it's my privilege to be able to help the students, and thank you, Gene, for tapping my shoulder. I was glad to do this.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. To everyone watching, thank you for tuning in to Troutwood Live.